Week 6 of the fantasy football season. And his running back starts in every matchup this week. 49ers at the Seahawks. Thursday Night Football, Jordan Mason. He's been a great fill-in for Christian McCaffrey with 3 games out of the first 5 over 100 yards on the ground. Last week, I thought the 49ers, they got away from the run a little bit, and obviously they blew that game after they were up 10 in the third quarter, losing 24-23 to the Arizona Cardinals. So Mason coming off of 14 carries, 89 yards. I think this week they get back to the run. We just saw Tyrone Tracy, the rookie for the Giants, go for 130 yards on the Seattle team. And Mason, I think, goes out there and has a nice game. Kenneth Walker start, Zach Charbonnet is sick. Kenneth Walker, it was just a weird game script. They didn't run the football a whole lot. It was a Seattle Seahawks team, and it did them in, I believe, in the end of the game where there wasn't enough balance and they were passing way too much. But Walker still did a lot of work in the receiving game, 7 catches, 57 yards. But like I said, he only had a few touches, but he's a start each and every week is Kenneth Walker. Zach Charbonnet is sit. He's not really getting any carries out of the backfield over the last couple of weeks, but still a good receiving back out of the backfield. But I think the Seahawks in this one, they got to go back to the ground game, keep that San Francisco offense off the field. And this week, we know Thursday night, usually the ball games are high scoring. We saw it last week with the Bucs and Saints. So this week, Charbonnet, he's a sit. Boys at the Bears, Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne, they're both flex options. We just don't know how it's going to go now in this backfield. And this week's a tough matchup versus Chicago Bears. I know Chuba Hubbard just went for 97 yards on this defense, but like I said, it's a 50-50 split. I believe it's going to be. Bigsby had the big breakout game, 101 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns, and a catch for 28 yards. But with this Bear good defense, and we don't know the workload, at best these guys are back-end flex options or low-end RB2s with a tough matchup. And Travis Etienne last week, he did better work out of the receiving game than in between the tackles. And I've said this for weeks, I think Etienne's a good third down and change of pace back, but not really in between the tackles, first and second down, where Bigsby's more the bruiser and the more physical back. But this week with the tough matchup, and we don't know how the workload's going to go for both players, their flex options. DeAndre Swift to start. Last 2 weeks, 20-plus fantasy points in PPR leagues for Swift. And Swift, he had a good workload. I know it was a great matchup versus a weak Panther defense, 21 carries, 73 yards in that ball game, and he added a few catches as well. But DeAndre Swift, all of a sudden, is moving up the rankings pretty quickly at the running back position. He's a star. Roschon Johnson a sit for me in this one. Johnson, he's been the goal line back. Khalil Herbert pretty much phased out of the offense, and he did have 10 touches, 25 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But if he's not scoring a touchdown, he pretty much hasn't had value. Tampa Bay Bucks at the New Orleans Saints, division matchup, another indoor game. Rashad White, Bucky Irvin for the most part. 50-50 split last week, and Irvin had a costly fumble towards the end of the game where they were looking to run the clock out. And obviously, the Atlanta Falcons got the football, drove down, tied it, and then won in overtime. And Rashad White, he's not that great in between the tackles, even though the last couple of weeks his yards per carry have gone up a little bit. But this week, it's a tougher matchup versus a good defense in the New Orleans Saints, especially versus the run. So this week, they're both flex options to me. And just like the Jacksonville situation, we just don't know week in and week out how many touches per player it's going to be. Alvin Kamara, he's a must-start each and every week. I know it wasn't the greatest of games versus a tough Kansas City Chiefs defense, but Kamara, he's been a top 3, top 5 back all season. And Tampa Bay, they really can't stop the run. So Alvin Kamara this week is start. Arizona Cardinals at the Green Bay Packers, James Conner start. He's been a solid running back all season long, and he's a guy that good workload. I know last week, tough matchup. Only 19 carries, 86 yards at the 49ers, but Arizona came out with the victory, and he's got one of the best volumes you'll see in the league at the running back position. So this week at Green Bay, I know they got a great defense and cause turnovers, but you could still run on this defense, I believe. We've seen it with Aaron Jones a couple weeks ago. We saw it last week, a good game fight, Kyron Williams, and I think Connor has a decent ball game once again. Josh Jacobs to start, getting a monster workload. I know Manuel Wilson, he's worked in a little bit, but Josh Jacobs, one of the better backs so far this season in fantasy football, and he's good weekly for about 10 to the 18-point range. And this week in a good matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals, where their running defense isn't good. He's a start. Indianapolis Colts at the Titans. Jonathan Taylor, he's a top 10 back if he starts in this ball game coming off the ankle injury. But we'll see if he's good to go in this one. If not, Trey Sermon's going to start once again. And Trey Sermon, he looked pretty decent. He found the end zone. I know the yards per carry weren't great, but in the passing game, he did some damage with 6 catches. So Trey Sermon, he's been a good fill-in, and he was a top pickup off the wire last week. So if he's starting in this game, he's a flex option because this Tennessee run defense is a solid run defense. We saw they shut down Devon Achane in week 4 ball game, and now they're rested and ready to go in a home game. So if Taylor's in, he's a top 10 back, and if Sermon's in, he's a flex option at the back end this week. Now to the Tennessee Titans, Tony Pollard to start. He's been one of the better running backs in all fantasy football. And this Indianapolis Colts team that can't stop the run. Saw it early in the season. Week 1, Joe Mixon went off for a big game. We saw it in week 2 as well, where we saw Josh Jacobs a big game. And we saw it last week, Tank Bigsby going over 100 yards and finding the end zone twice. So Tony Pollard's locked in as a great option this week. He's a start. Tajay Spears, he's been up and down so far this season. Banged up a little bit going into the bye with an ankle injury. And just not enough volume. And like I said, Tony Pollard's looked like the better back this season. So Spears is a sit. Cleveland Browns at the Philadelphia Eagles. Jerome Ford, he had a down game. And this offense, it's very tough to watch, and they just can't move the football effectively as well with Deshaun Watson at quarterback. But Deshaun Watson, it looks like he's going to stay in the starting lineup for this Cleveland Brown team, which I don't think does him any good. I would just go to Jameis Winston and see what happens. So Jerome Ford's a flex option. Tough matchup versus the Eagles. The touches, we just don't know week in and week out. We saw Deonta Foreman get 9 touches again in this game on the ground last week at the Commanders. We'll see if he comes back in this game after missing the first 5 weeks, recovering from a torn ACL. So Chubb practiced last week. We'll see if they use him in this game. And even if he's back, Nick Chubb, I think they're going to ease him in, and it'll be a 50-50 split at best between him and Jerome Ford. So Nick Chubb, obviously, should be rostered in 12-team leagues, is Nick Chubb. But like I said, they're going to ease him in is this Cleveland Brown team, and at best he's a flex option with buys or injuries. If you're dealing with that, Saquon Barkley is start each and every week, one of the best running backs in the league, and just a great fit with this Philadelphia Eagle team. And with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith returning to the lineup, things might open up even more for Saquon Barkley sees a start. Joe Mixon, I thought he was going to come back over the last couple of weeks, but it just hasn't happened, and at this point, I'm going to rule him out until we see something from Mixon. So Cam Akers, Dare Agumabale, both sits for me. Agumabale, he's been the better running back and had 21 touches in last week's ball game versus the Buffalo Bills. Even though he's more of a third down back, he still had 14 carries, had 7 catches, 67 yards in that ball game. And this week in New England, I just don't see enough volume between the two guys once again, where I believe Houston's going to go out there and throw the football a whole lot. So they're both sits. Ramondre Stevenson, he was benched early in that game. Antonio Gibson got the start, but it didn't mean much. Stevenson went out there and he had a solid performance with 19.20 fantasy points in PPR leagues, over 80 yards on the ground, found the end zone. He had 4 catches for 3 yards, which obviously didn't amount to much. But like I said, Stevenson, so far 3 good games, 2 bad games to start the season. And this week, where the game script might not be in his favor, where they could be trailing early and often to Houston, I still believe Stevenson could go out there and be an RB2. Antonio Gibson, like I said, he got the start, and he still didn't really even touch the ball much until third, fourth quarter in that game last week in the tough loss versus the Miami Dolphins. So this week, Gibson, he had an opportunity. They didn't give much to him just for the first drive. And then Stevenson got his rollback. He's a sit. Commanders at the Baltimore Ravens, Brian Robinson, he's a locked-in back each and every week. Top 12 option. He's a must-start. 2 touchdowns last week. This week, I know tougher matchup at the Baltimore Ravens, but this has a potential to be a shootout between these two teams. Austin Eckler, he's been solid in PPR leagues, but his workload's been obviously inconsistent, where if he's not catching the football and getting a lot of yards after catch, is Eckler. He's not putting up much numbers. So I think as a back-end flex option, third running back, could be decent for fantasy owners. Derrick Henry, he's having a monster season. I thought he was going to decline, but everything's great for Derrick Henry this season. Yards per carry are up there. He's getting obviously easy goal line touches where this offense drives the football down the field a lot. And he's just been a workhorse once again and putting up big numbers. And this week, a Commander defense that's definitely improved. It don't matter. Henry goes out there and has a big ball game. Justice Hill, this is going to be a ball game where I don't know if the game script's going to favor Justice Hill. And last week you thought in a shootout like that, winning 48-138, he was going to go out there and have a monster game. But obviously that didn't happen. So Justice Hill is a sit for me. We got to see more consistent outings. And like I said, his workload, you just don't know week in and week out what you're going to get. Los Angeles Chargers at the Broncos, J.K. Dobbins, I'll give it the start to. With the bye weeks, with injuries at the position, I know it's a tough matchup, no doubt about it. But Dobbins so far this season, he's been a top 15, top 20 running back in points per game. And we saw the first 2 games of the year, over 130 yards on the ground in both those games. So like I said, definitely a tough matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league. But I think Dobbins goes out there and has a decent performance. Gus Edwards, he's been non-existent. And it wouldn't be surprising to me in this one if Kamini Vidal is active for the first time this season, where we usually see after bye weeks, rookies pick up the playbook more. They're active and they get more playing time. So like I said, Gus Edwards, he might be phased out of this offense. And this week, we haven't seen much out of him. He's a sit. Javonte Williams for the Broncos is a flex. Last week, he had a good ball game, but that was versus the weak Las Vegas Raider defense. And this week, I think it's going to be a grinded-out, tough ball game for both teams where not much is going to go up on the scoreboard, where it could be a kickers type of duel in this one. So like I said, it was good to see Williams last week have 15 fantasy points in PPR leagues. He was the top dog in the backfield once again, stepping in at times and having a touchdown in the red zone on a reception. But Javonte's still the guy, and he's a flex option. Auckland's a sit. Last week it was nice to see him score the touchdown. In the last 2 weeks, his numbers have definitely gone up and his yards per carry have been better, but he's still tough to trust, even as a flex option, is McLaughlin. Have to see just a little bit more, so he's a sit. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Vegas Raiders. Najee Harris looks like he's the last man standing in the backfield for this Steelers team. Jalen Warren's been out, Cordell Patterson's been out, and Najee Harris in a good matchup that I actually like at the Vegas Raiders. I think goes out there and has a good game. And we saw Javonte Williams have his best game of the season last week versus Raider defense. He's a start. Zamir White possibly could return in this game, but even if he does, I don't see much of a workload for him. He's a sit, and this is a good run defense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Alexander Mattison last week, he had a healthy workload, had 10 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But like I said, this offense as a whole just isn't great. Besides Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers at times, there's no one consistently I would start in my lineup. And this is a tough matchup for the Raiders, where I think they're going to have to throw early and often. I know the Cowboys ran the football well, where Rico Dotto had 80 yards on the ground. But that ball game was close, and I think the Steelers get off to an early start and make the Raiders one-dimensional. Atlanta Falcons at the Panthers. Bijan Robinson to start. I know he's been a struggle for him all season long, but he does have double-digit fantasy points in all 5 games this season in PPR leagues, even though I know fantasy owners took him 4th, 5th overall in most drafts is Bijan Robinson. But this week at Carolina, a team that's getting shredded on the ground weekly, I think Robinson goes out there, and this could possibly be his best game of the season, so he's a start. Chuba Hubbard, he's a start for me. Jonathan Brooks, he possibly could start opening his practice window this week, but obviously they're not going to rush him. Is this Carolina Panther team? I know they want to see what they have with the second-round rookie this year, but like I said, this Panther team 1-4 in the season. Chuba Hubbard running well 2 games in a row with over 100 yards, and then last week in a tougher matchup versus the Bears, he had 97 yards on the ground. So Chuba Hubbard, he's a top 12 option so far this season in the start. Detroit Lions at the Dallas Cowboys. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. If you've been watching the channel, I've said they must start running backs each week. It's 1-2 combo running backs on the same team in the league. So their starts, Cowboys can't stop the run. I know last week they did a decent job versus Najee Harris, but this week these are 2 top running backs, especially Jahmyr Gibbs is an elite running back that can do it all. So they must start options. Rico Dotto, a flex option. I know Dotto the last 2 games, great ball games. He had a touchdown in week 4 at the New York Giants, 13 points in PPR leagues. And then last week he had a nice receiving touchdown as well for the Dallas Cowboys and had 19 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But this week could be a ball game where it gets out of hand early and the Cowboys got to drop back and throw the football 40 or 50 times. And this Cowboy team, believe it or not, they've been better on the road than they've been at home this season, where they've got blown out in 2 games at home. I know the game versus Baltimore in week 3 was closer than you saw it, but it was 28-3 they were down, and the Cowboys lost that one 28-25, and then in week 2 they got the doors blown off by the New Orleans Saints 44-19, where Rico Dotto wasn't an option. So like I said, I could see Detroit getting off to an early start, and it's a ball game where Dallas has to throw nonstop. And Zeke Elliott, he's pretty much been phased out. The offense here for this Dallas Cowboy team, where only short yardage work we've seen him get over the last few weeks, and not even goal line work. So he's a sit. Sunday Night Football, Cincinnati Bengals at the New York Giants. Zach Moss, we'll see if he plays in this game. He left last week with an ankle injury, and if he does play, he's a must-start. This week is Zach Moss. He could catch the football out of the backfield, obviously running between the tackles, and this Cincinnati offense has been great this season. The problem's been their defense, and that's why on the year they're 1-4. So if Moss plays and the ankle isn't an issue, he's a start. And Moss plays, Chase Brown's a flex option, good receiving back out of the backfield. A nice 1-2 combo for the Cincinnati Bengal team. And he's turned the season around over the last few weeks, putting up fantasy points. So if Moss is out, though, then Chase Brown I would put in the starting lineup. I don't know what Seattle was doing last week, not running the football a whole lot at this New York Giant defense. We've seen teams have success this season running the football against New York. And I think this week, Cincinnati, they're going to slow down the pace a little bit if they can and use their running back. Like both guys this week now to the Giants, Devin Singletary, he missed last week's game. And I think Tyrone Tracy, even if Singletary plays in this game, deserves more touches after putting on a monster performance, 18 carries, 129 yards in last week's win at the Seattle Seahawks. So Singletary, he's been decent so far this season. Last week missed a game with the groin, and they're both flex options anyway, because this could be a game where they're not going to be running the football a whole lot, and Cincinnati gets off to a hot start, and they got to be one-dimensional in pass, even though Singletary's a decent receiver out of the backfield. Tracy, if he's starting in this game, we only saw one catch for 1 yard with Gray mixed in as well. For this Giant team on Monday Night Football, Buffalo Bills at the New York Jets. James Cook is a start for me in this one. He's one of the better running backs and consistent backs in the league this season. Last week he found the end zone once again at the Houston Texans. And this New York Jet run defense has been pretty good for the most part this season. But I think James Cook, he's matchup proof. And like I said, running back's been a tough position all season long. So James Cook's a start. Now to the Jets, Breece Hall a start. I know the last couple weeks the numbers have really been down there for Breece Hall. After the first 3 weeks of the season, he was putting up fantasy points, but his yards per carry was still weak. And this Jet team, you've noticed, if they're down early and often, or even if it's a tight ball game, Breece Hall, he hasn't really done much in those situations so far this season. But this week, they got to rely on him a little bit more. Aaron Rodgers is definitely banged up with his knee in last week's ball game, even though he came back in the game right away after he had trouble getting off the field a little bit. So they got to start feeding him more and get him easier plays out of the backfield to catch some passes as well. So he's a start. Brandon Allen is a sit. The last couple weeks, his numbers have gone down, even though he outperformed Breece Hall in Week 4's game versus the Broncos. And then last week, he didn't do much in that performance in London at the Minnesota Vikings. So Brandon Allen not getting enough of a workload. And this Jet backfield isn't doing much the last couple weeks, and the offensive line isn't blocking well as also. So this week he's a sit. That's running back start, sits every matchup for Week 6 of the fantasy football season.